One of the great privileges of being a minister is being invited into the last moments of people's lives. I was at the bedside of a man in another congregation who was dying. He was quite elderly, in his 90s, and he had been a scientist his whole life. He'd been a mean guy. He was mean to his wife, he was mean to his grown kids, he was mean to the other people in the congregation. He kicked against everything. And now he was kicking against death. And he said, "I don't know how to do this. How do you die?" And I was touched by the openness of that moment in him. And I said, I don't know how to do it, but I've sat at the bedsides of people who were dying, and it looks like you just go farther and farther away, and you come back and go again, and your body just shuts down, and then you're gone. For some people, it's like falling asleep. I said, "You've fallen asleep millions of times, right?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "I don't know if it's like that or not." But he was going hard. He was dying like he had lived. And in my experience, people tend to be themselves as they're dying. They do it like they did life. People who don't want to cause any trouble, they spend their whole lives not wanting to cause any trouble. They won't cause any trouble as they die either. They'll slip away while nobody's looking. And people who are very dramatic, they will probably have drama as they die. If you are a person who pulls your family and friends around you during difficult moments, you probably will do that as you die. There are people who want to be sung to, and there are people who want to be read to, and now there are folks who are professional, or they call themselves midwives of death. So they will help birth you into the next whatever it is, with singing or reading or calling people you want called. It's important to do this the way you want to do it. One man who was, he was a darling man. He had been a colonel in the Army, and he was just warm and loving to everybody. He was dying, and he hadn't called anybody, really. I happened to be there, and the night nurse happened to be another member of the congregation. And so he died with his wife holding one hand and Greg, the nurse, holding the other hand, and I was holding onto his feet, and we were talking to him and talking to each other. Not a bad way to go. One man who was a gardener, he had said, "I don't want to outlive my legs." That was his goal. And so he came to church one day in a wheelchair, and he just said, "Meg, I wanted to go to 95, but now it doesn't look so good." I had brought him some rosemary to smell. He had turned into a gardener. He'd come down to the South Carolina, from Chicago in the 30s to be a union organizer. So he was one tough man. And he had worked as an organizer and in politics for his whole life, until he decided he'd rather deal with plants. I brought him some rosemary, and he took a long breath of rosemary, and he said, "Oh, rosemary, that really pulls its weight." My mother had breast cancer for 5 years, and she decided she'd like to die at home, and she didn't admit she was dying until the very end. She was always hoping to get healed. And finally she called me. I was at seminary, and someone drove me to the house, and they made a pallet by the couch where she was lying, and I lay there all night. And she would call out sometimes, and I would wake up and I'd say, "Mama, I'm right here." And she'd say, "Just a minute, I'll be right there." Like she'd gone someplace far. My great-grandfather, I've told you about him before. He was a preacher who stayed in the same church for 54 years. And he had 12 children, maybe 11. And anyway, he's the one who retired this way. He had his 80th birthday, and then he stood up in the pulpit the Sunday after his 80th birthday and said, "I don't believe that a preacher should preach after he's 80, and so I'm retiring today." He pointed to a man in the congregation and said, "Brother Matthew, would you have the prayer?" And everybody bowed their heads, and he walked down the aisle and out the door. When he died, his children were gathered around, and grandchildren and friends, and the windows were open. Everybody was sitting on the porch, and they heard him saying, "Isaiah, I'm James Hurst Presley from Statesville, North Carolina. Pleased to meet you." "Jeremiah, James Hurst Presley, Statesville, North Carolina. Pleased to meet you." And then he died. The end of life is a threshold time. It means, the psychologists call it a liminal time. It's a time when things can change. They're more malleable. Weddings, births, memorial services, deaths are liminal times, and families can break up at the time of a death, or they can be reconciled. People can get closer. It can be a good family time, or it can be a bad time. It's almost always a time when people are emotionally wrecked. Either you've been caretaking for a long time and you've had this long, slow emotional load, or the death is sudden and everybody's just stunned. And sometimes, I just read this week for the sermon Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal. And he talks about the decisions that are made at the end of life and how wearing those are on people. You have to decide, do I want to go through this aggressive treatment in order to get 2 more months, even though maybe it'll make me feel sick, or maybe it'll get me 3 months, or do I want not to have treatment and have a better quality of life in the last 2 weeks? What do I want to do? And he talks about how difficult it is for families at this emotionally wrenching time to make those decisions, and he recommends, along with me today to you, that you do it ahead of time, that you think about these things ahead of time, because making decisions like this when you're emotionally wrecked, you don't make the decisions that you would otherwise make, the best ones. And if you decide that you don't want any extraordinary measures, you have to really get your family and friends together and say, this is what we have decided on, because you know there'll be someone blowing into the hospital at the last minute saying, do everything. And the family has to say, we decided not to do everything, because it gets to look like torture after a while. And just because medicine can do something doesn't mean medicine should do something. So these are things that I'm asking you to think about. And I'm asking you, if you have regrets, if you have relationships that have been broken, if they're at all fixable, it might be time to try to fix it before you're dying, so that you don't have to die with a lot of regrets that have been fixable. Some of them you just live with. And it's good to think about your memorial service, too, because your sister's not going to make the right choices for you. You decide where and who and what the music is going to be and what the readings are going to be. You can decide all of that. I've got a form. If you email it me, I will email it to you, and then I'll keep it in a file in my office. And I can show the family, look, this signed and dated. Here's what she wanted. For me, I want to look back on a life that I thought was worth living. I got to start doing more gardening. And if y'all outlive me, okay, so the first song of my memorial service is going to be Skylark. It's really sad and haunting. I want people crying, okay? Crying. Don't make me have to hire mourners from somewhere else. But the last song is going to be Blue Skies. Nothing but blue skies from now on. And then we'll have a happy reception. I mean, not we, y'all. Or whoever's around. I hope to outlive everybody, but you never know. So think about it now. Tell the people you love them that you love them now. And let's talk a little bit about dying. You don't have to be doing it to talk about it. And it's scary to talk about, but we are brave. We are brave together because we have each other. And so we can talk about things that are scary. Thank you so much for listening to that. I appreciate it.